to introduce Robert Grow, and I know some people are going to filter in here. Allison Davis, I don't know if Allison is in the room yet or not. I know that there was a SET meeting earlier today. But Allison and I were fortunate enough to receive a HUD grant, one of the Sustainable Communities grants. We got $550,000 to work with a region in Kentucky and Tennessee that had actually applied for SET, for the Stronger Economies Together program. Didn't write that great of an application, but we saw some real potential in them, so we wound up writing a HUD grant for them. And so we were called to Washington, D.C. to their Sustainable Communities Conference. And as I'm walking around and listening to speakers and so on, I ran into this Robert Grow guy from Envision Utah. I said, we're going to Park City, and this guy talks the talk and walks the walk. We need him to come and speak at our conference. And so I was looking around for him, and I finally found him. I literally tackled him in the hallway. I hope he's okay. He's a lawyer, so I need to make sure he's okay. I don't want any personal injury suits or anything else. But really, Robert is the chairman and a founder of Envision Utah. And after listening to the mayor yesterday, who's obviously drank the Kool-Aid, okay, which is great. Not a lot of mayors in Tennessee have drank the Kool-Aid, or they have, but it's for other reasons. Robert is a person that really does walk the walk and talk the talk. And I wanted him to come today because we've heard from a university president who understands what we do. We've heard from Sally Maggart, who is our federal representative, who certainly understands what we do and advocates for us. And I wanted to hear from someone who's actually boots on the ground getting things done. And as you can tell, in Park City, things are getting done, but things are getting done all over Utah. And some of it is a mindset, and some of it is just, raw gusto going out there and getting things done. So I wanted Robert to come today and give us a feel for what's going on here in Utah, to set the stage for when you guys go out into Utah today and really get a feel for what's going on here in Park City and elsewhere within the great state of Utah. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up Robert Grow.
Welcome to Utah. I understand I'm the only one, according to the mayor, who's improperly dressed today. Is that true? I see another tie. Are there any others? Oh, Michael, you didn't learn your lesson either. Okay, theoretically. Wow, there we go. This is good. Well, thank you for inviting me this morning, and it's always an honor to visit with people from outside our state and to be able to talk about our state. Now, we're sort of proud of this place, so I apologize in advance if you sense that or feel like we're maybe a little over proud, but would love to talk with you about some of the things we've seen accomplished over the years and about how we've been able to do some of those things. Now, before I start, this is sort of like a smorgasbord. If there's something that makes sense to you and might appeal to you in terms of the problems and issues you have back home, take it home. If it doesn't make sense, that's fine. Just enjoy your breakfast. A number of years, I'm going to tell you a story since we're into stories this morning. A number of years ago, there were two hunters out on the plains savannas of Africa, and they were just getting up for breakfast and really hadn't had a chance to dress yet and weren't quite awake, and they saw a large, hungry lion headed their way, and recognizing he hadn't had breakfast either, they took off running. And the first one outran the second one, and he saw a small tree, and he scrambled up the tree just as the lion was closing in on them. The second one ran and dove into a cave in the side of a hill. And the lion got to the tree and scratched at it, and the first guy could just barely stay out of reach of the lion. But then the second guy jumps out of the cave, and the lion rushes him and almost gets him. The man jumps back in the cave. The lion goes back to the tree. The guy comes out of the cave a second time. The lion rushes him again, almost gets him. And his friend in the tree shouts over to him, "You better stay in the cave or the lion is going to get you for breakfast." And his friend from the cave shouts back, "You don't understand local conditions. There's a bear in the cave." So I don't understand your local conditions. And so I hope what I say will be useful to you in some respect, but if it's not, once again, enjoy your breakfast. Now, I'm going to talk about Envision Utah. Envision Utah was founded 15 years ago formally this January. So it's an effort that's been around for quite a while. And don't tell me my computer's frozen. Oh, there we go. And Envision Utah is really one of those major efforts to do what we call regional visioning. Now, the process I'm going to talk about works for regions, but it also works in subsets. Envision Utah has now done over 49 individual processes within the state of Utah two outside the state, to help solve problems in our state. But the process I'm going to talk about is sort of the overarching vision we created a number of years ago. And we view this as a very powerful tool to meet difficult challenges and create sustainable communities. I know you're spending a lot of time talking about limited resources, and we all face a lot of trends and challenges which are, some are unique to our localities, others are not. How many of you watched the eclipse the other night? Now, how many of you know the name of the little town in southern Utah where it went right over where you can see the ring of fire? Canaraville. Canaraville is, if you were in Cedar City, most of you don't know where Cedar City is, but Cedar City is a pretty bustling little university town in central Utah. If you used to drive out of the main street of Cedar City and go south, you ended up in Main Street, Canaraville. And Canaraville was also a bustling little town. Now, what killed a lot of bustling little towns in America about 50 years ago? The interstate highway. And so if you're in Canaraville, if you've got really good eyes, you can see off in the distance I-15 going south. And Canaraville currently today has about 311 population. I drove through it on Saturday, took a look at what they were doing. They were so excited. They were setting up hot dog stands and hamburger stands in the main street, and they were going to charge $5 for parking. I mean, you could have parked anywhere. But if you were gracious, you parked in one of the $5 spots and watched the eclipse with the people of Canaraville. And so, you know, we're all facing unique challenges, some special to our area, some that are not. And I just want to mention some of them. Of course, is the issue of climate change. We just experienced our wettest winter in Utah in like 40 or 50 years last year. And this winter, it's like the third driest in 50 years. And so, you know, whether or not you attribute it to this or not, there's certainly major concern about it among most people. By the way, we finally have found positive proof of global warming over the years. I'm sorry, enough said. Just remember you saw this slide in Utah. Okay. Energy costs have certainly been going up in our country. I quit making this chart in 2009, and it went back down a little bit, but where's it been going recently? Up. How many of you think energy prices will be down in 10 years? Up in 10 years? Yeah. And so that's going to go on. We've learned how to feed our cars what we used to feed our people. And so we're seeing rising food prices. I was told that when the next corn crop comes in, there'll be 10 days of corn left in the world. It's one of the major crops of the world that we feed people with. Wheat usually stays at about 60-day supply, northern and southern hemisphere combined. And so we have people think Arab Spring happened almost just for political reasons, but it may have been largely caused by food issues in Egypt. We've also seen a major trend in housing prices over the last 15 years. This is my favorite postcard from Florida. Finally found a place I could afford. Now, they've moderated, but in most places they haven't moderated that much. And so there's still housing issues around the country. We're seeing major demographic changes, aging population, declining household size. You see that great jump of people turning 65 in 2012. I'm not quite there, but some of you may be in that category. But that's our parents who came home from World War II and got married and had babies for many of us. And so huge changes in demography in the United States, ethnicity as well. We just saw half of the births in America last year were minority births. Amazing changes happening. We've been in a deep recession with job losses. It's been difficult to attract good jobs. We compete as regions based upon crime, healthcare, schools, housing availability. It's one of those magazines that tells you how businesses choose where they're going to go. And so we all are trying to provide these things for our economy and keep businesses coming. For those of you who how many of you live in major metro areas? Most of you are from rural areas. Yeah, major metro areas face this. This is Dallas in 2000, their congested streets. This is projected 2030. Now, some of you may live in places that have rush minutes, not rush hours, but it's getting worse in lots of places for our economy. And so we talk about sustainability, about what we'd like to accomplish. And this is the definition of sustainability I really like. It's from Hawaii's 2050 sustainability plan. The second and third bullets are very familiar to all of us. It strikes a balance among economic, social, community, and environmental priorities. The third one, it meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. But the first one I really love. This is Hawaii thinking about Hawaii. They want to respect the culture, character, beauty, and history of their island state. And so every place is unique, and so almost there's a fourth leg of sustainability, and that's about protecting and preserving the best of what we already have, the best of our past. And that's been a lot of the foundation for Envision Utah, is having that kind of memory. So what is regional visioning? Well, it's really an effort to solve problems at the right scale. Whatever the scale of the problem is, it has a scale, whether it's about air quality at air sheds, water and watersheds, commuters and commuter sheds, and so on. If you solve problems at the right scale, you're most likely to get the right answers. And so our governmental entities today often are not the right scale unless you get a bunch of them together to work on solving the problem. The air in the Salt Lake Valley doesn't really care at all where the boundaries of the 20 or so cities are in the valley. And so air quality is an issue we all have to work on as a valley-wide issue. And so this is a way of empowering regions to enhance the quality of life and to compete better in what is really a dramatically changing global paradigm. So what is strategic visioning? It's not about knowing the answer of what the future will bring. How many of you pulled all of your investments and retirement, whatever you may have, out of the stock market in 2007? If you pulled everything out of 2007, raise your hand. We have one person who did that. The rest of us did not see the future coming. And 4 days ahead, this man is in the wrong business. What do you do for a living? See? I wish you'd been my advisor. But what visioning is an analysis of alternative scenarios about the future, because we don't know the future. It's about making wise decisions in the face of uncertainty. So visioning is not about forecasting. It's not about predicting one outcome. It's about preserving your best options, finding the strategies that are robust and will really bring you the possibility of preserving the best of what you want to have as the future changes in front of you. So it's a very sophisticated technique that really came out of the military, it came out of business. That's where this technique was perfected. And what we're talking about is bringing that scenarios planning, envisioning different virtual futures and modeling them, thinking them through, bringing that into community development. And why do we do it? We do it because we have a very complex situation in America about getting things done. We don't have dictatorships. We don't have regional bosses. We have very complex networks of governments on layers of government. We have complex relationships with the business community and the environmental community. So we do this to help the public and today's decision makers understand the long-term consequences of what they're doing today. The future of wherever you live will be made up literally by thousands, tens of thousands, maybe millions of personal decisions. And so how we make those decisions will affect the outcome, and the outcome then is affected by, are we all sort of headed in the same direction? Have we actually aligned our interests in getting to the same place? Now, how far out do you think when you do visioning? You can ooh and ah if you want. These are some of my grandchildren. And I have this picture to remind me why I do what I do. There are actually more of them now than when this picture was taken. We actually had a set of triplets in one of my that are not in this picture. But when I was in college, you know, long-term thinking was what I was going to do on Friday night. And then I got married, and then I had a child. And I started to think about what her life would be like when she was my age. And all of a sudden, my mind started to have the capacity to think about a generation. And then lo and behold, my wife and I raised 6 children. And then all of a sudden we started to have grandchildren. And then, for the first time, I really think I started to grasp the issue of what life might be like for them in 2 generations. And so the little boy, who was raised partly in China, and his sister right there, the little boy is exactly 50 years younger than me. And so when I think about the future, this is the way I do it. I think about them And if you don't have a grandchild yet, pick a child who's young and think about what their life will be like. And what your role is in that life is a future left to chance, a legacy you want to leave your children. Because when we don't plan, when we don't think, when we don't envision the future, that's what we leave them, is a future left to chance. And our parents, our grandparents, were building things. They were creating a world for us. And that's exactly what these children hope we're doing for them. And someday I hope they look back and say, wow, your generation actually did some great things. You actually were smart about the way you dealt with our resources, about the way you dealt with our economy, about the way you dealt with education, so that our lives and our children's lives could be great as well. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about the history of Utah. The first Mormon pioneers in the Salt Lake Valley, this is an artist's depiction of them. There were two of them. The guy on the horse is my great-great-great-uncle. His name was Orson Pratt, and the guy next to him is a guy named Erastus Snow. And they came into the valley 3 days ahead of Brigham Young. They had it all figured out. They had already been all over the valley. They had actually diverted a creek and planted some potatoes. And it was a good thing when Brigham Young here and stood up in his buckboard and said, this is the right place. It was a good thing he did, because they were already hard at work in the valley. And within 4 months, they were followed by a wagon train of 2,000 that entered this desert. And there was only one tree in the Salt Lake Valley back then. This was not a lush green area. This was really pretty much a desert along the Wasatch Front that had never been cultivated. The Paiute Indians had been very successful living here in small numbers. But that was a major change. They almost starved to death that first winter because so many of them came. And they learned how to work together. But by the time we started looking about our problems in the late 90s, we were facing a lot of interesting challenges that some of you may chase. So, some of you are in areas where employment is difficult, things are shrinking. Others are in places where things are growing. Our problem was the growth issue, but either way, the same process applies. We were going to add 1 million new residents to the Wasatch Front by 2020. Our air quality was getting worse because of the valleys, these bowls we live in that trap the air. We were doubling the amount of urban land we were going to consume by 2020. We needed new water resources by 2010. Things were getting more crowded and congested. Business and personal costs were rising. And I know everywhere you live has enough money to build roads and rail and infrastructure, but we were short money to do all of the things we needed. So our demands for infrastructure were being outstripping our resources. And so facing all of those, we came together and formed 15 years ago a thing called Envision Utah, a partnership for quality growth. By the way, we didn't call it smart growth in Utah back then. Smart growth was an intellectual fetish of a self-selected liberal Eastern elite. Okay, I won't repeat that. That's hard. Smart growth was an intellectual fetish of a self-selected liberal Eastern elite. We have our own politics in Utah, and we'd like to find our own future. And so we didn't call it smart growth. We called whatever our answer was going to be quality growth. If you go by Orlando's visioning effort, they call it smart quality growth. And so the names are different in different places. But we were concerned about our future. Anybody from Philadelphia, anybody from Pennsylvania here? I apologize, but this is the picture we used to scare people in 1997. We're going to be 5 million people in the greater Wasatch area. Do you want to be Philadelphia? What do you think the reaction was? Pain, agony. No, I don't think so. Let's find our own way of growing for the future. And so we looked at this greater Wasatch area, the Wasatch Front and Wasatch Back, and we gathered together a large stakeholder group that represented 500 city council members, 500 planning commissioners, 30 county commissioners, 90 mayors, hundreds of developers, realtors, and others. We had federal representatives of our legislators. The state government was involved. The governor was an honorary co-chair, and so on. So we created Envision Utah by bringing the widest group I think had been brought together in the last 100 years in Utah. Not everybody in our conservative political environment was enthused about this idea. They were afraid it was some grand conspiracy to take rights away from local government or concerning property rights. It was not. This cartoon appeared not long after we were formed. You see the hunter there with the shotgun behind his back and the hand of carrots, and the rabbit is the city going, oh, I get a choice here. And so we clearly had to demonstrate and have demonstrated over 15 years that Envision Utah has absolutely no political muscle. It has no statutory authority. It doesn't have anything but the power of good ideas. And it's the power of good ideas that persuade people, and people like to make their own choices. So let me talk a little bit about the process we went through. First of all, wherever you are, if you're trying to bring people together, you need to build on your history. And so we had Brigham Young show up for our first meeting. That's him sitting there. He spoke before our governor, and he chastised us all for what we'd done with his fabulous plan. I mean, those big wide streets, you know, that grid system, we stopped doing it. We started doing spaghetti streets like everywhere else. And so he talked to us about the challenges that he'd seen and how they'd faced them. And that's Mike Levitt, our young governor, at the podium. That's the young version of me on the right. The governor was one honorary co-chair. The other honorary co-chair was Larry Miller, who's the guy in the plaid shirt, who would have fit right into this group with no tie. Larry Miller bought the Jazz, protected it from leaving the state. He was Utah's everyman. He wore sneakers to formal events and golf shirts. He wouldn't office downtown because people downtown were snobby. And everybody loved Larry Miller. And so that was the leadership, sort of, I was the chair, and then these two honorary co-chairs, and about 113 stakeholders, plus a lot of other people involved. So this is the group we brought together. It wasn't designed to be people who had a fixed idea of the future. It was designed to be Utahns from all these walks of life who would take off their personal interest hat and say, I love this place, what shall we do? You know, if we look at long term, what are our best strategies for the future? Now, there is a traditional planning approach we develop in America. I'm a lawyer. Are there any other lawyers here? Anybody willing to admit they have a law degree? There, oh, I found one. Oh, good. Let's see, we're going to test her. What is due process? Due process. If I say I'm going to give you due process, so what does that mean? Yeah, you get a chance to present your ideas, your case. Actually, that's what it's supposed to mean. What it really means is giving the public just enough participation so you can withstand the inevitable lawsuit. Okay, we in America have sort of lost track of what due process was supposed to mean, which really was the golden rule in action. I listen to you, you listen to me, we figure out what the problems are, we study the problems and come up with solutions. So what we turn out to do in America is somebody decides for us, usually, through analysis and research, what the solution to the problem is. They educate the public about the solution they've picked. They announce the plan they've chosen for all of us. They end up defending the plan because they actually didn't get people involved, and that usually ends up in somewhat of a disastrous situation. The study goes on the shelf, gathers dust, because there was no civic will behind the plan. And so the concept of Envision Utah was built on this survey. When we asked Utahns in 1997, who can best deal with growth issues, Utahns said, people like you and me. They were willing to have state government involved, but not delegate it to state government. They were willing to have local government involved, but not give it away to local government. Businesses were welcome. Other organizations were welcome. By the way, do you see federal government there anywhere? I'm sorry, but federal government just didn't even appear. You know, it wasn't because they weren't given that choice, but the idea of the federal government telling them what to do, that was just off the charts, not welcome. So people are not willing to delegate away their involvement in making decisions about the future. And so Envision Utah was founded on the premise that it is the public that has the right to choose the future. And public officials are public servants who should serve that choice. They're not the bosses. They're not the ones who make the decision for us. They're there to implement the choices that the public chooses. And the corollary to this, and you have to believe this or this doesn't work, the public will actually make good choices if you present them with real options. People are willing to make hard trade-offs. People are really smart. They live in the world we're creating around us. They're smart at what solutions to look at. They're smart at making wise decisions. And so that's the premise of Envision Utah. So essentially, we took what we're good at in America, which is planning things and funding things and building things, and stuck onto the front of that a process that you go through first, where you say, what are the values of the people who live here? What is it they really want in their life? Why are they here? Why did they come here? Why do they stay here? Why are they in this community? What what resonates emotionally with them, and then how does our region provide that? That's a vision. How could the region provide what the people actually want in their lives? If you're making your decisions based on something other than what the public wants, you'll never build the civic will to do it anyway. Now, there are people who are skeptics about this process because they don't trust the public. And I could give you some real examples from when we started out, groups saying, oh no, we got to put this in every scenario because the public will never choose it. The public transportation system we built in Utah was one of those examples where some groups said, oh no, we can't give them a choice about that. We need to build it for them. And I kept saying, no. If the public don't choose it, you'll never get it funded anyway. And so what you do is you start with the values of the people. You look at their choices through a visioning process. Then you develop strategies to implement. Then you go out and plan and fund and build. But you do it with their values, their objectives, their hopes, dreams, aspirations in mind. Now, why do you start with values? Values are stable and enduring. They're life's tides as opposed to the waves. Every one of us has a set of values, deep embedded in us, and they change very slowly. But they are the reason we make the decisions we make. I have a good friend who went to law school with me, who came up to me one day after he heard me talk, says, I finally figured you out after all these years. You use all your brain power to obfuscate the fact you decide things based on your feelings. Now, am I alone? Yes, we love analysis. We love understanding facts. We love thinking through logically the answer. But how many of us at the end of the day actually make the decision about our lives based upon our emotions and how we feel? If you think you actually function that way, raise your hand. There are a few of you. Some of you think you're all about brains, not about heart. And if you think about this very long, go back through the decisions you've made in your life and think about the big ones, the important ones. Where am I going to live? What job am I going to take? Who am I going to marry? And so on. And were they emotionally driven after you thought through all the facts, or were they factually driven? So I want to talk about values for a minute. What do people want in their communities? They want a lot of things that we sort of have around us we take for granted. Things that provide personal growth and well-being. They want education for their children and higher education, ability to have lifelong learning to keep their skills honed. They want to have community where they feel safe and secure and they interact with neighbors they know and trust. They want to have places to go to recharge their batteries. They want to preserve the environment, but most of all, they want to protect nature and enjoy nature. They want to be able to spend time together, not have it stolen from them. They want to have quality places for recreation with themselves and their friends and family. They want to have places without bad traffic and accidents. They want to have a place that they feel safe to get out on the streets, where they feel secure, and so on. And so those are some of the values. You can learn values from people in lots of ways. One way is workshops. So we did about 100 workshops. This shows our young Governor Leavitt pondering over a map. We said, here are chips for 1 million people. Show us where you're going to put the next 1 million people in Utah. And they got them all down in about 45 minutes. Came back and said, oh, by the way, there are 2 million more coming by 2050. Here are the chips for 2 million more. Put those down. And they were density at the same density we were growing at. Pretty soon, the chips either went on the tops of the mountain in the middle of the Great Salt Lake, or you had to start stacking chips. Oh, there's not enough room. We're going to have to do this differently. So it's just a great picture of Governor Leavitt thinking through that ponderous problem. Where are we going to put everybody? But we also did a study about the values of Utahns, and I want to show this to you because it's a very interesting way of communicating. And we live in a time where communicating what you're doing and why you're doing it is so essential to being able to bring people together and build civic will. This is a mind map for Utah. That's what Mike Leavitt called it when I showed it to him the first time. He actually said, wow, this is a roadmap for getting elected governor. He was already governor. He was worried somebody else might get the roadmap. Down here in the bottom in red are attributes of Utah. Things people, when you interviewed them, we did like 100 in-depth, couple-hour interviews. Is it affordable to live here? How much can I make? Is there crime? How's the population growth affecting things? How's the outdoor recreation, scenic beauty, traffic, and so on? Those are attributes of our region. The next level up is what those things do to you or for you in your life. functional consequences. So I want you to pick the one that says traffic over here, and says, what can it do to you? Well, you can have more car accidents. Or it says save you time, but does traffic save you time? No, it steals your time. So it's always said positively on the map, but saves you time, so it steals your time. And so those are functional consequences. The next level is emotional. How does that make you feel? The next level is at a values level. First, peace of mind, self-esteem, personal enjoyment, family love, so on. And so this is actually a map for how to communicate about issues in Utah. I was invited to Arizona a number of years ago by Governor Napolitano. They were about to do an election to build a light rail system. And they were having all sorts of problems doing it. And I went down and looked at their advertising campaign, and it said, gee, if you vote for this, you get 25 miles of light rail. If you vote for this, you get 25 new interchanges and so many new miles of interstate highway. If you vote for this, you get 385 new buses. And I don't have the numbers exactly right, but you get the idea. And I said, where does it say if you vote for this, you get home for dinner with your kids? Okay? And I want you to take traffic for a minute as an example. How many of you, well, let me ask you, on average, everybody in this room spent 2 weeks last year stuck in traffic. Now, many of you are from rural areas, so it's not as true of you, but particularly those of you who live in urban areas, it's at least 2 weeks of delay. Now, if I could give you back the 2 weeks you lost last year, what would you have done with the time instead? Well, what would Utahns have done? They would have spent it with their family. They would have been less stressed. If their boss is sitting next to them, they say, I would have done a better job at work. Okay? How do you feel? It makes me feel happy, less stress. I'm doing things with people I love. You see how you use this to communicate? Everything that you're concerned about in your community actually taps into some value ladder where you first talk about how it impacts their life, and then you talk about the emotional quotient. What do they feel from that? And when you do that, all of a sudden, you start to change people's perspective and their minds. If you want to grow differently, if you want to change direction, it's as much about getting people's hearts as it is getting their heads. And so we can prove lots of things here, but it's when you get to here that things start to change, and you actually find the tremendous energy in people to bring change. Now, I could show you all the value ladders for Utah. We want safe, secure environment for our families, personal and community enrichment, financial security, and I can tell you which are the value ladders that dominate our landscape. I also have the maps like this for Orlando, San Diego, Phoenix, Traverse City, Michigan, and other places, so I know pretty well a lot of the values across the country. Personal time and opportunity, by the way, is where traffic goes. And by the way, if you aren't in traffic, you enjoy the scenic beauty, the outdoor recreation, you have a lot more choices in your life. So on. You can see how you use this to communicate. If you're not communicating in your community about things that really matter to them, first about how it impacts their lives functionally, and then how it impacts them emotionally, you're missing a chance to really build support. Now, this is a chart we did in 2002 as we were just doing Envision Utah, which shows we needed 76,000 new housing units over the next, or we built 76,000 in the last 6 years, and affordable units, so many affordable needed, we had a shortage of 12,000 affordable units, okay? And we also predicted that the housing demand in 2020 would not meet, or the supply would not meet the demand we had. Now, these are pictures of 2 of my kids' houses. Now, these pictures are 8 years ago. Carl and Lisa, they then went to China. He helped open the Google office in China. They had that house. Cost them $600,000. Why so expensive? Can you guess why that'd be so expensive? It's not the yellow attached garage that was expensive. It's location. They were in the San Francisco Bay Area, right? They sold that house, by the way, for $900,000, okay? And then the other house is my son Matt, who got his PhD in history at Notre Dame, and his wife. It had more square footage in it. It was about the same vintage. Only cost how much money? $87,000. Why was that one so expensive? Location again. Now, how many of you have a son or daughter who graduated from college in the last 5 years? Okay, what was their starting salary? Now, we all pray they went to work when they graduate, okay, but what was their starting salary? $56,000. Who else had one? $40,000. How much? $100 a month. Okay, we'll stick with these two for the moment. How much house can you buy for $40,000 a year? Okay. Now, I showed you two abstract charts about housing demand and housing affordability, and then I took the housing issue and I just personalized it right down to you and your children and whether or not they could afford a house. You see what I did with the values in communicating? How I took an abstract issue and made it very personal? Okay. That's what you do with values, is you rally people around causes that deeply concern their future and the future of their children. I'm spending a lot of time on this because it is the key to bringing people together. It is the most important thing we did at Envision Utah, was understand who our people were, what they wanted, and then spoke back to them their choices in language and about issues with emotions that they understood so they could make wise choices. Okay, so to be sustainable, a region must satisfy the values, hopes, dreams of present and future residents. Now, the next thing you do is you use scenarios. And I'm going to go through this quickly. Scenarios are just contrasts of choices about the way things may turn out in a region. And there are three major variables often: transportation, environmental, land use. And if you change those big variables about a region, lots of things are predictable. How much energy will you use? How good will it be for job creation? What happens to air quality? How much land you consume? What's the traffic like? What's water demand? How far do you have to drive to get things, and how long does it take? Open space, left, housing opportunity. You can even model carbon footprint for regions now. And so you can do lots of modeling, and there are lots of big picture changes in the way regions grow. And I won't spend time talking about this, but I'm talking about big picture scenarios. So I want to show you Louisiana. I helped form Louisiana Speaks after Hurricane Katrina, which really replanned the southern half of Louisiana. And it was after Hurricane Rita and Hurricane Katrina in 2005. You know, what happens when you slam the bowl of New Orleans with a 22-foot storm surge? It just literally lifted the boats out and set them on the shore. You could drive for miles, half an hour in almost any direction, and not find an inhabitable house. Things just stacked out front. It was an amazing, and it was an equal opportunity destroyer. I mean, it didn't matter if you were rich or poor. 8 feet of water in your house does exactly the same thing. And so what had happened? What was the cause? Well, part of the cause was these were the great wetlands at the mouth of the Mississippi in 1839, 1870, 1930, 1993, and projected for 2020. And wetlands stop the storm surge. If there's not water, it can't keep surging. And so one of the big questions that we asked people was, what happens, what caused that? Well, they channeled the Mississippi River. It no longer flooded the delta, and so that was what would happen in the next 20 years at the mouth of the Mississippi. Well, what if you started to reroute some of the Mississippi River? See, this is scenarios planning. We're taking it. We have a choice here. What if we started to reroute it across the delta? How long would it take us to start rebuilding, resupporting the wetlands? And we also not only looked at wetlands, we looked at housing types. What if you just create Atlanta, move the people and create Atlanta north of Lake Pontchartrain? Okay? Lots and lots of sprawling subdivisions. I'm not knocking Atlanta, by the way. I have a son who lives in Atlanta. But what if you were to densify to some degree? That's not a light word I really like, but Baton Rouge. Okay? Baton Rouge has block after block. This is like 3 miles from the state capitol. What if you were to go back in there right on the Mississippi, on the beautiful Mississippi there, and just start to bring people back into the urban areas? So you see some of the choices you have? That's scenarios planning. Those are some of the visualizations from that effort. I'm going to skip that one. And so scenarios planning is used to take a big picture look at regions. I'm just working right now in San Diego, where they're completing a regional vision where they took 4 topics: economic development, work, land use, transportation, environment, and cost of living, live, education, learn, and community and culture, enjoy. And they just went through the largest public outreach of any regional vision. These are some of the scenarios. I'm just going to show you. Look at how different these were for the region, A, B, C, and D, but they're very different ways of growing in the future. They had over 30,000 people answer a 23-minute survey online. 30,000 people, 1%, And when we surveyed afterwards, 800,000 people were aware of and in some way participated in a region-wide visioning effort. I mean, most politicians think they'd died and gone to heaven if they had 800,000 people who'd heard their message. These were the original scenarios from Envision Utah. Keep growing like we were, bigger lots and so on, expanding. B was more like we had done more compactly over the last 30 years before that. C was, well, let's start building some light rail. Let's have some transit with some growth around those transit nodes and protect some open areas. What about D if we really got more intense in our development and so on? By the way, D turned out to be worse for the environment because pollution is measured in pollution per cubic meter of air. When you get everybody closer together, it doesn't necessarily solve the problem, it can make it worse. And so you always learn a lot. There are a lot of surprises when you model a region or you model a county or you model a city looking at the future. And we model for things for people like how much land are we going to consume under the scenarios? You know, there are different ways of visualizing that. How much more would it be under each scenario? How many miles would you be traveling in a day? What would the total emissions be from the automobiles and the transportation? What would the housing mix be for our kids and grandkids? How much we could save $15 billion in infrastructure by doing C and D over doing A. And so those are big questions when you're thinking about resource allocation, whether it's air quality or it's water or it's money for infrastructure. How you grow matters. By the way, that's the tagline now for Envision Utah. How you grow matters. And it really can change a lot of things. We took it to the public with 600,000 surveys. And the public in Utah, which is viewed as a relatively conservative place, chose C, leaning towards D. And a lot of people took a deep breath and said, really? Utahns now understand that might be a better way to grow that might serve their values. Now, how do you implement that? You have all these people been involved in the whole process. They went all the way through it for 18 months. They now believe it and understand it, and they go back and change things. You're not trying to push this on anybody. It just happened. And so we had these 6 goals that came out of Envision Utah. That there are the big goals. There were 42 specific strategies we've been implementing for 15 years. One of the biggest is on transportation. After the envisioning process, 88% of Utahns said they wanted to expand the light rail system. Light rail was viewed by some as a communist conspiracy when we built the first line. Some of you from Utah remember that. You know, light rail kills babies. I never got that sign, but okay. So people changed their minds. People literally changed their minds about what they wanted, and cities started competing for the next rail lines by saying, if you bring it here, we'll build this around it and provide the ridership. See all the things that happen when you have a robust strategy like transit. Transit changes urban form. It renews old communities. It protects air quality, does all sorts of wonderful things. And so all these people have been involved, not us, but the mayors went back and reopened the long-range transportation plan and added a whole bunch of transit to our region. Then the state went out and spent $185 million and purchased 175 miles of redundant rail lines on which we could build 9 transit corridors. We started looking at those transit nodes, and this was a vision slide from back then. It basically said you had 80,000 acres within a half mile of the transit stops we might have. That was enough room for 1 million people, not crowded, but 1 million people at a relatively low density to live where they could walk less than 1,000 steps and get on a high-quality transit system. 1 million people. Think how that would change a region. Now, whatever your concerns and problems are, the process always remains the same. And so we are now in the process of seeing those transit nodes, and we have a very robust transit system now. We're seeing these kinds of things built around them. We now have the Front Runner, which is a major commuter rail. Half of it opens this December. We have a whole bunch of light rail lines running, several opening, including the one at the airport, probably within the next 6 months or so. We've got a great bus system. People have a whole new way to get around Utah because of this. It actually it doesn't quite get to Logan, but someday someday we'll have a train where you can get to Logan, I believe. How did we do this? I want to show you something. Let's open this place.
With waiting to solve Utah's escalating transportation crisis is the longer we wait, Act now to keep Utah moving. Vote for Proposition 3.
Want to speed up your commute? There. That just saved you 15 years. Build needed tracks lines, roads, and commuter rail 15 years sooner. Vote for Proposition 3.
Think about values.
In Utah, there are 80,000 more cars every year on our highways. If we wait to build more tracks, roads, and commuter rail, congestion will bury us. Vote for Proposition 3, because too many cars is just no fun. Utah's traffic congestion will triple over the next 25 years. So before our transportation system gives out on us, we need to relieve the pressure. Vote for more tracks, roads, and commuter rail. Vote for Proposition 3.
What were you communicating with? We are communicating to Utahns with values, things they cared about. You see the multi-generational aspects. It's very simply presented concepts. By the way, it took a long time to find a little boy who could be buried in cars and not freak out. Okay? So I just wanted to show that to you because it's how you do this that matters. It's not what you're trying to do. Every community is different. But if you look at what is the same, by the way, I got to stop. Advertisement. If you got to go see City Creek Center. We just opened the largest transit-oriented development in America. 20 acres came out of the ground all at once. It's got on 2 light rail stops. It's downtown Salt Lake. 2 major malls. It has retractable roofs. So in the wintertime, you can close it. In the summertime, it can be open air. It just opened in March. So we invite you to go see that. That's another thing that's happened is you look at the transit lines. Now you see all this major development along it. But wherever you are, whatever your concerns are, whatever you're trying to accomplish, whatever negotiation your region needs to have about limited resources and allocating those precious resources in a way that will protect their future and the future of their children and grandchildren, the process is always the same. It's about getting together a group of stakeholders, people who are interested in the process. They have to be trusted, they have to be diverse, they have to represent all points of view. Then finding out what your community wants, because the community values are the things that bring common ground. They allow you to communicate choices in a way that touch people's heads and their hearts and allow you to start building consensus in your community. And until we are aligned in our community on how we solve problems, there just are not enough resources. There just will never be enough if we're splintered and fragmented in the way we solve our problems. I'm a believer that there is enough and to spare of the Earth's resources to take care of the natural environment and to take care of the human environment both, if we can align our interests, if we can come together and we can work collaboratively to solve our problems. And we do that by understanding where we want to go with our values, being led by stakeholders who are trusted and respected, and then showing the public what their choices are in scenarios. How may this play out in our future if we choose to do this or choose to do that or choose to go this way? I want you to know that I've seen this process work not only here but across the country. It is the way that America is reinventing itself, is by changing the processes that allow us to make our decisions about the future. This is, in fact, the best kind of process that our ancestors knew. I've been to a little church in New England where my almost 10th great-grandfather, I believe he is, his name was Obadiah Pratt, went to meet with his town to decide if they were going to be rebels in the American Revolution or they were going to side with the British. And after arguing about it in that little town church in New York, they finally took a vote. And they all moved together, decide, as is typical probably of my family, with the rebels. Okay? But that's how we used to do America. We would get everybody together. We'd talk about how to do it. And then we'd make decisions and we'd move in concert for the good of the community. Regional visioning processes like this at all scales are the best way to use the technology of today, the analysis of today, the best we can to show the public their future so they can make wise choices. Thank you for having me today. I hope you have a great time in Utah. Thank you so much. Oh, very good questions. Okay, there is a strategy to creating the stakeholder group, and it gains momentum because of who comes. And so you actually had, we took us 6 months, we did a stakeholder map of our region. We was a small group of the Coalition for Utah's Future, but essentially what became the steering committee. It was about 10 of us who were interested in doing this, who'd come together and said, we need to find a better way. And we actually went and looked at some other communities who were doing things, thought through the process. The Coalition for Utah's Future had its theme of finding common ground for the common good. And so they had been trying to solve problems in Utah for quite a while. So the small group of us said, okay, who do we need to bring together? Not who's on our side, not some outcome, but who would need to be at the table to solve all these issues. And then we mapped all of them, and we ended up with, I think, a list of about 85. We ended up with about 113 on that steering committee. And we started going out asking one at a time. And the first question people ask you is, well, who else is on board? So you sort of start with people who you think everybody's going to want to be on board with. So went to the governor, went to some other leading citizens that were, I mean, every community's got a set of trusted, respected people who are viewed as statespersons. You sort of get them first. Then you get some political leaders on one side. You get this trusted group of citizens in the middle. You get sort of the common cast of characters, who are involved in everything on the other side. But that's how you do it. It's a very careful mapping process followed by you have to have a plan for what you're going to do. The business community won't come if you're going to take longer than 18 months. They do not have the tolerance for, analysis paralysis and taking forever to solve problems. And you need, what is missing in a lot of places is getting the business community involved in these processes. Because when it came time to run those votes for the public transportation, we needed to change the headroom for our sales tax. We needed the legislature. The business community led that charge, for example. So it's a very careful mapping of your region. Now, who pays for it? Well, as you ask people to come to get involved, you also ask them to contribute so that they have some skin in the game. So a third of the original funding came from foundations, a third of it came from business, and a third of it came from government. And I could explain it was even more complex. About half of the government was local government, half of the government was state government. And so, and a lot of it was in kind. You involved the media. We got a lot of free press. You earn your press by doing interesting things. I mean, that kickoff with Brigham Young and the current governor, that got a lot of press. A lot of cameras were rolling. And so there's a lot of stagecraft in getting the kind of public involvement you want to have. Does that answer your question? So you have to whatever your problem is, you say, how big is it? Who are the stakeholders? How much resource do I need? How long is it going to take? Here's my plan, and then you go to work. Yes.
When are you going to do this on the national level?
Oh, Washington. Not this year. I don't know the answer to that. I'm sort of apolitical in the sense that I'm a believer that communities functioning together actually are politics. I mean, the real politics is you and me deciding where we want to go, and then politicians see that overarching vision and they fall in line. Now, at a national level, I don't know how you do it at a national level. So, good question, though.
One more line, sustainability and the Agenda 21.
Yeah.
New research, unfortunately, that kind of derailed the process.
Unfortunate, it's an interesting word. There's a lot of political angst and a lot of anger. And if channeled right, that political angst and anger can become a positive force in changing communities. But the issue is, this is the best way for a local government to keep control by solving its own problems. This is the best way for the public to protect their property rights and what they want in their communities. This is not about a new layer of government or anything like that. And so a lot of this process was actually designed because of our political environment, which I believe in. I believe in local government. I believe in property rights. I believe a lot of things that those people also believe, but I interpret how that does not block us from communities coming together. And so the word sustainability is a word that I don't use a lot. I used it in this presentation, but I like to think of building enduring communities, communities with balance that are taking into account. I mean, there are a lot of other ways to describe what we're doing. So the answer is yes, there's a retooling, but the fact is ours was designed from the beginning because we've always been a place which, I mean, Mormons are not so conservative as they are populous. And when you understand that, it's different. I mean, we don't like big things. Most of the Mormon pioneers got here after they'd been driven out of 2 or 3 or 4 states, depending on when they joined the movement. And so they were opposed to big government, they're opposed to big business, they're opposed to big anything that could hurt them. They were into working together to solve problems. And so most people are populists. Most people are independents with some political theory that gets them into one party or the other when they go into the booth. So political theory and how this all works is a very interesting discussion. There's a book on how democracy works around the world, 10 examples written by an MIT professor. Envision Utah is one of the examples, and he pulls it all together into all of those things. If you're a political theorist, you might love. And,